Close your eyes and imagine stepping through the gilded doors of a royal palace. The light catches crystal chandeliers, gold leaf climbs every wall. Tapestries woven with silk thread tell stories of conquest and glory. And then, without warning, it hits you. Not grandeur, not majesty, but a smell so thick, so rancid, that your throat tightens and your eyes water. A smell of bodies that haven't touched water in months, maybe years. Of perfume so heavy it can't quite mask the rot beneath. Of silk gowns that have absorbed weeks of sweat, fear, and decay. Welcome to the truth behind the throne. The kings and queens we imagine as untouchable gods were often walking nightmares of filth. Convinced that the very thing we consider basic human dignity, a simple bath, could kill them where they stood. Elizabeth I ruled England with an iron will and a brilliant mind. But beneath her jeweled gowns and towering wigs lay a secret that would make your skin crawl. The Virgin Queen bathed once a month, and she was proud of it. She would announce it to her court as if it were a badge of honor, a testament to her restraint and self-control. To her, water wasn't cleansing. It was death waiting to seep through open pores. Her physicians warned her constantly that hot baths invited plague and fever into the body, that soaking in water was like opening a door to disease itself. So Elizabeth made a choice. She would stay dirty, and she would stay alive. But the cost was unimaginable. Instead of bathing, she changed her linen undergarments obsessively, believing the fabric would absorb the filth from her skin like some medieval sponge. Her laundresses worked day and night, scrubbing and boiling mountains of stained cloth while the queen herself remained unwashed beneath layers of fresh fabric. And then there was her face. Elizabeth was obsessed with maintaining her pale, mask-like appearance, the look of an immortal goddess untouched by time. She painted her face with white lead foundation, a thick poisonous paste that built up week after week because she refused to wash it off properly. Instead, she simply added more layers. Imagine the reality beneath that mask: sweat mixing with lead, oils from her skin trapped under cracking powder, scars from smallpox festering in the darkness, hidden behind a facade that grew thicker and more toxic with each passing day. The cracks in her makeup weren't just cosmetic flaws. They were canyons revealing the rotting truth beneath. Her courtiers wrote endlessly about her magnificent presence, her golden hairpieces, her dazzling authority. But never once did they describe how she smelled. That silence speaks louder than any chronicle ever could. Across the channel, another monarch was building his legend on an equally rotten foundation. Louis XIV, the Sun King, the man who transformed himself into a living god, and built Versailles as his temple, supposedly bathed only twice in his entire 77 years of life. He despised water with a passion that bordered on phobia, convinced it would weaken his body and invite sickness into his flesh. Instead, he drowned himself in perfume, oceans of it, desperate to cover the stench of decades of accumulated filth. He changed his silk stockings and lace collars constantly, layering clean fabric over dirty skin as if clothing could somehow purify what lay beneath. Ambassadors wrote in their private letters that you could smell the Sun King before you saw him enter a room, and the experience was rarely pleasant. Here was the most powerful man in Europe, the architect of absolute monarchy, and he reeked like a stable hand who'd worked a month without rest. But perhaps the most disturbing detail is this: Louis didn't see it as a problem. In his mind, and in the minds of his court, this was simply how royalty lived. The smell of unwashed bodies became so normal, so expected, that it faded into the background of palace life like the sound of distant music. When everyone stinks, no one does. And so the rot continued, generation after generation, a legacy of filth passed down like a crown from one monarch to the next. James I of England took this royal tradition of filth to new depths of horror. He had a philosophy that sounds insane to modern ears but made perfect sense in his twisted worldview. He believed that the dirtier your skin, the healthier your body. To James, grime wasn't just tolerable, it was protective, a shield against disease and weakness. So he wore the same clothes for weeks on end, let his hair grow wild and matted, and scratched himself constantly during court audiences as lice and fleas made homes in the folds of his unwashed garments. Imagine kneeling before your king to receive a knighthood, and as he touches the sword to your shoulder, you can see the insects crawling through his beard, smell the weeks of accumulated sweat radiating from his body. This was the man who united England and Scotland, who commissioned the most famous translation of the Bible in history, and he was absolutely crawling with vermin. Queen Isabella of Castile, the woman who funded Christopher Columbus and changed the world forever, claimed she had bathed only twice in her entire life, once at birth, once at marriage. For Isabella, bathing wasn't just dangerous, it was sinful. She believed that washing your body encouraged vanity and lustful thoughts, that cleanliness was somehow an affront to God's design. So she lived in calculated filth, using scented oils to mask the smell and prayer to justify the rot. Her devotion to this twisted form of purity may have actually shortened her life, as infections and skin diseases festered beneath robes that never touched water. The Spanish court became a place where holiness and horror walked hand in hand, where the smell of unwashed flesh mixed with incense in the cathedral air. Louis XIII, father of the Sun King, inherited his son's hatred of water and somehow made it worse. When his physicians insisted he bathe for medical reasons, servants had to physically drag him screaming into the tub like a terrified child. The King of France, sobbing and thrashing, fighting against the horror of soap and water. If you've stayed with me this far, if these stories have reached into your chest and made something twist with fascinated disgust, then do me one small favor. Hit that subscribe button, because the past is full of horrors we've forgotten. Truths that history books gloss over with pretty words and noble portraits. And I'm here to pull back that curtain and show you what really lived beneath the crowns and gowns. Let's keep digging into the darkness together. But perhaps no royal better embodies the tragedy of perfumed rot than Marie Antoinette. The young Queen of France surrounded herself with beauty, with towering wigs powdered white to hide the sweat, with gowns layered so thick they trapped every drop of moisture against her skin. She had a private bath installed at Versailles, a luxury almost unheard of. And yet she rarely used it, still clinging to the old fear that water would open her body to disease. Instead, her maids performed dry baths, rubbing her down with cloths soaked in alcohol and vinegar, a ritual that left her skin raw but never truly clean. She lived in a cloud of perfume so thick that courtiers could track her movement through the palace by scent alone. When revolution came, when the common people stormed Versailles screaming about her obscene wealth, they had no idea that their glittering queen lived in a palace that reeked of unwashed bodies and stale flowers. And in the end, when Marie Antoinette was stripped of everything and thrown into a grimy prison cell, she finally stank not from choice or fear, but because she had nothing left. The perfumed mask was gone, and only the truth remained. When we look back at these monarchs now, when we see their portraits staring down from museum walls with such dignity and power, it's almost impossible to reconcile those images with the reality. These were people who commanded armies, signed laws that shaped nations, controlled the fates of millions. And they were terrified of soap. They believed that the thing we do without thinking every single day could kill them where they stood. So they hid their rot under silk and perfume, under powder and prayer, building empires while their own bodies decayed beneath their crowns. The next time you turn on a shower, the next time you reach for a bar of soap, remember this: you have access to a luxury that kings and queens would have called deadly. You live cleaner in one day than Elizabeth did in a month, than Louis did in a lifetime. History remembers them as gods. But if you stood close enough, the truth would have hit your nose before your eyes ever saw the crown. That's the final horror. The most powerful people who ever lived were afraid of the simplest act of human dignity, and that fear left them drowning in their own filth while the world called them magnificent.